My husband's ex-girlfriend secretly donated a kidney to me. After the surgery, her health declined rapidly, and my husband took care of her with overwhelming attentiveness. Then, standing on his moral high ground, he scolded me. Nina, she ended up like this because of who? Can't you be a little more understanding? Endless arguments followed, and I eventually wasted away from the emotional exhaustion. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the moment right before my kidney transplant surgery. I immediately pulled out my oxygen tube. I'm not going through with the surgery. I'm giving up on treatment. I never imagined that after my death, my husband would go insane. The overhead fluorescent light flickered, making me dizzy. The sound of the doctor's voice announcing the countdown to the kidney transplant echoed in my ears. I suddenly realized I had been reborn. Without hesitation, I pulled the oxygen tube out. Struggling, I sat up on the operating table. Dr. Lucas, I'm not going through with the surgery. I'm giving up treatment. Dr. Lucas was shocked, repeatedly emphasizing that my body couldn't afford to wait any longer, and that if I missed this chance, I might not find another matching donor in time. I thanked him, but I remained firm. Dr. Lucas sighed in resignation, and notified everyone to cancel the surgery. After signing the organ donation consent form, I returned to the downtown loft I shared with Ryan. I started packing my bags. I had been diagnosed with kidney failure in the second year of our marriage while we were trying to conceive. At that time, Ryan and I were constantly at odds because of Claire Young. I thought having a baby might bring us closer, but instead, I received the terrible news about my health. Strictly speaking, Claire wasn't really Ryan's ex-girlfriend. She appeared in his life while I was abroad pursuing my ballet career, and they never officially became a couple. Back then, I was ambitious and determined not to give up my career for love, and I succeeded, becoming the principal dancer of the Joffrey Ballet in just 2 years. When I returned, I found out Ryan had been waiting for me all those years. His devotion moved me beyond words, and memories of our time together as students filled me with warmth. I accepted his proposal. It was only after we married that I learned about Claire Young. I discovered they had nearly become a couple, but my return to the US had torn them apart. Because of my upbringing, I've always been sensitive and insecure in relationships. Ever since learning about Claire, I couldn't sleep at night, and the arguments between Ryan and me grew more intense. I questioned him, asking why he claimed to love me but still had feelings for someone else. He accused me of being unreasonable and making things up. As the fights escalated, Ryan started working late just to avoid coming home. It wasn't until I sought help from a therapist that I realized I still loved Ryan, this man who had been such a huge part of my youth. So I called him and asked him to come home. That night, he rushed back, embracing me as if he never wanted to let go. He promised he would transfer Claire to another city and focus on our marriage from then on. It was around that time I went for a checkup, planning to start preparing for a baby. Later, the doctor told me they had found a matching kidney donor. The donor wished to remain anonymous and didn't want to reveal their identity. I understood, but I never imagined that person would be Claire. The day after my surgery, Ryan sat by my bedside with red eyes and told me we owed Claire a huge debt. From that point on, he showered her with care and attention. I couldn't show any dissatisfaction. If I did, I'd be seen as ungrateful, a heartless woman. I could only watch as Claire slowly took Ryan away from me. I was powerless to stop it. In the end, I wasted away from the stress. When I died, Ryan stayed by Claire's side, refusing to leave her for a moment. This time, I've chosen to let them be. To free myself, I had lived in the downtown loft for 2 years, and packing took 3 suitcases. I sat on the couch, waiting. By 11 p.m., Ryan still hadn't come home. I called him. He answered almost immediately, but on the other end, it was Claire's voice. "Mrs. Carter, is there something you need from Mr. Carter? He's exhausted from back-to-back meetings and fell asleep at the office." Claire had just undergone the kidney transplant surgery in Chicago. I knew that, but I didn't expect her to head straight to Ryan's office after getting off the operating table. She really did love him. I spoke calmly. "It's nothing important. Just let him know when he wakes up. I've left the divorce papers on the dining table. Tell him to sign them when he has the time." Claire gasped in shock on the other end of the line, her excitement barely concealed. Before she could say anything else, I hung up. I moved back to my Gold Coast apartment, the one I'd bought before we were married. I thought Ryan would come looking for me, or at the very least call to discuss the divorce. But, as it turned out, I was overthinking it. There was no word from him. His phone had even been turned off. With no other choice, I went to his office. To my surprise, the receptionist informed me that Ryan had been in a car accident 3 days ago. His phone had been smashed, and he hadn't had a chance to replace it. He had just undergone surgery, and was now out of danger. My first reaction wasn't worry, but amusement. I had been diagnosed with kidney failure and hadn't told him. He got into a car accident, and I didn't know. This marriage had clearly run its course. I drove to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and sure enough, I ran into Claire outside the private suite. She was dressed casually, with perfectly applied makeup, radiating friendliness. I glanced toward the hospital room. Is Ryan not here? Mr. Carter's getting some tests done. He should be back in about an hour. Claire's expression turned cold as she closed the door to the suite. Why don't you head home? Her disdain for me was clear. I smirked. Claire, you can play the part of Mrs. Carter all you want after the divorce, but right now, you're still not qualified. Claire frowned, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that all you've got? She paused for a moment, then smirked, bragging. Did you know when Ryan was unconscious and being rushed to the hospital, he was calling out my name the entire time? That's why the hospital called me and not you, Mrs. Carter. She bit hard on the words Mrs. Carter, her tone heavy with ridicule. In the past, hearing this would have sent me into a rage, but after all the arguments and silent treatments, I no longer cared. I was dying anyway. What did it matter what she said? I remained calm, pulled out the divorce papers from my bag, and handed them to her. In that case, could you give this to your Mr. Carter? Have him sign and return them when he gets the chance. As I spoke, I watched Claire's face change. She grabbed my wrist, trying to make me slap her with the papers. The divorce papers scattered everywhere, and Claire turned her head to the side, dramatically covering her face with her hand, feigning pain. I winced from the sharp pain in my wrist, sucking in a breath. Before I could react, Ryan's cold, angry voice came from behind. Apologize.